Between 1918 and 1918, a city already brought to its knees by pandemic and war was stalked by a phantom. This entity did not discriminate by class or creed, yet it seemed to favor a specific community. It left no clear fingerprints, only shattered doors, a bloody axe, and a trail of terror that would culminate in one of the most bizarre demands in the history of crime. To understand the Axeman, one must first understand the city he haunted. New Orleans in the spring of 1918 was a city under immense strain. The Great War raged in Europe, drawing away young men and resources. More immediately, the first waves of the Spanish influenza were beginning to lap at the city's doors, a pandemic that would eventually claim thousands of lives in Louisiana alone. The atmosphere was one of collective anxiety. It was into this febrile environment that the first blows fell. On the night of May 23, 1918, at 1207 Upper Line Street, an Italian-American grocer named Joseph Maggio and his wife Catherine were attacked in their sleep. The assailant gained entry by chiseling out a panel of the back door. Joseph was found with his throat slashed. Catherine was brutally struck with an axe. The police discovered the murder weapon at the scene, the Maggio's own axe, cleaned and placed back in its usual spot. Nothing of significant value was stolen. The initial investigation, hampered by the crude forensics of the era, floundered. It was treated as a gruesome, but likely isolated domestic tragedy or a crime of passion. The city barely had time to register the event before the war, and the flu seized its full attention. The lull was brief. 2 months later, on August 5th, another Italian-American grocer, Louis Bessumer, and his live-in companion, Anna Lowe, were attacked in their sleep in a similar fashion. Bessumer survived a severe head wound. Lowe, initially comatose, died days later. The method was the same. A panel chiseled from a door, an axe taken from the premises, and a seemingly motiveless violence. The attacks were no longer coincidental. A pattern of entry was established, and a specific type of victim was emerging. The New Orleans Times-Picayune began using a new, terrifying moniker for the perpetrator: the Axeman. Fear, once a background hum, began to crescendo into a palpable panic within the city's crowded neighborhoods. As the attacks continued into 1919, the Axeman's signature became chillingly clear. The victims were predominantly, though not exclusively, Italian-American grocers and their families. This was a close-knit community, often living in the apartments above their small corner stores. They were vulnerable, accessible, and for reasons unknown, targeted. The killer's modus operandi was both brutal and methodical. He would case his targets, often using the cover of night in the city's labyrinthine alleys. His point of entry was almost always a door panel, chiseled out with a precision that suggested practice. He never brought his own weapon, instead using the household's axe or straight razor, which he would often clean and return to its place. Forensic science in 1919 was primitive. Fingerprint analysis was in its infancy and easily foiled by the rough, porous surfaces of wooden doors and axe handles. Blood typing could only provide class evidence, not a positive identification. Without witnesses, without a clear motive of robbery, and with evidence that was largely circumstantial, the New Orleans Police Department was effectively blind. The psychological impact was profound. The Italian-American community felt besieged. Families barricaded their doors with furniture, slept in shifts, and kept firearms and knives close at hand. Hardware stores reported a massive surge in sales of door locks and bolts. The city was living under a self-imposed curfew, its nights ruled by the fear of a chiseling sound at the back door. The Axeman was not a specter. He was a man of flesh and blood. But his identity was a cipher. Was he a lone individual or part of a larger conspiracy? Was his targeting of Italian grocers a personal vendetta or a smokescreen for more random violence? The police had no answers. Then, in March of 1919, the killer decided to speak. On March 13th, 1919, the New Orleans Times-Picayune and the state's newspaper received an identical typed letter. It was signed with theatrical flair, "The Axeman." The letter began with a declaration of demonic infallibility and a chilling promise of a forthcoming murder. It was a piece of pure, calculated terror. The core of the letter, however, was its bizarre and unprecedented demand. The Axeman declared that on the following Tuesday night, March 19th, he would pass over the city. He would spare one house from his wrath, every home where jazz music was being played. He wrote, "I am very fond of jazz music, and I swear by all the devils in the nether regions that every person shall be spared in whose home a jazz band is in full swing at the time I have just mentioned." The city's reaction was one of mass surreal compliance. On the night of March 19th, 1919, New Orleans did not sleep. Instead, it erupted into a city-wide jazz party. Dance halls were packed. In every neighborhood, from the wealthiest garden district to the most cramped immigrant quarters, phonographs blared jazz records. Pianos, trumpets, and clarinets sounded from open windows, creating a cacophonous symphony of defiance and fear. No attack was recorded that night. The Axeman had kept his word, or perhaps he had never intended to strike. The event was a masterstroke of psychological manipulation. He had transformed himself from a mere murderer into a folkloric boogeyman who could command the behavior of an entire metropolis. He was no longer just a man, he was a myth that walked. The letter's psychological implications are profound. It demonstrated a need for notoriety, a desire to engage with the public narrative. The demand for jazz music, a genre then associated with vice in the underworld, has been variously interpreted as a genuine preference, a mocking gesture, or a clever way to ensure the city would be awake, noisy, and distracted, potentially covering the sounds of a future attack. In the wake of the letter, the pressure on the New Orleans Police Department became immense. Their investigation, which had yielded little, now focused on a few key suspects. The most prominent was Joseph Mumfre, a known criminal with a long sheet of violent offenses and a specific grudge against the Italian community. He was monitored but never formally charged in connection with the Axeman crimes. The case seemed to break with the attack on Mike Pepitone on October 27, 1919. Pepitone was dragged from his bed and murdered with an axe. His wife provided a description that would later become critical. The investigation quickly centered on two men, Frank Giordano and his father, Orlando. The evidence against them was circumstantial at best, relying on shaky witness testimony and neighborhood gossip. Frank Giordano was put on trial for Pepitone's murder. The case against him was weak, built on coincidence and the desperate desire of the city and its police to secure a conviction. The trial was a media circus, with the specter of the Axeman hanging over every proceeding. Despite the flimsy evidence, the atmosphere of fear was the prosecution's star witness. In a shocking verdict, Frank Giordano was found guilty and sentenced to hang. His father received a life sentence. It was a legal failure, a miscarriage of justice born from panic. The convictions, however, did not stop the attacks from occupying the public mind. The mystery was too deep, the pattern too established, for these convictions to feel like a true resolution. Other suspects floated through the investigation. A mentally unstable man was institutionalized, with authorities quietly suspecting he was the killer. Others have since been proposed by historians: a lone psychopathic individual, or a hitman working for a shadowy consortium seeking to drive Italian grocers out of business. None of these theories have ever been substantiated with concrete evidence. After the Pepitone murder in late October 1919, the attacks ceased. The chiseling of door panels, the brutal strikes of the axe, the rising panic, all of it stopped. The Axeman, as suddenly as he had appeared, vanished back into the shadows from which he came. The city cautiously at first began to exhale. The Giordano convictions were eventually overturned. New evidence and the work of journalists exposed the frailties of the case, and the men were released. The true killer of Mike Pepitone was never found, and the question remains: was Pepitone the final victim of the Axeman, or was his murder a copycat crime that allowed the real killer to disappear? The most compelling, though unproven, epilogue to the story occurred in Los Angeles in December 1920. A woman named Esther Albano, whose husband had been an Axeman victim, recognized and shot a man named Joseph Mumfre on a public street. She claimed Mumfre was the Axeman, and she had exacted her revenge. Mumfre died of his wounds, and Albano was convicted of manslaughter. With Mumfre's death, the most promising lead, if it was one, died as well. The case of the Axeman of New Orleans was officially closed, but never solved. It remains one of the most enigmatic serial killer cases in American history. Its uniqueness lies not just in the brutality, but in the killer's conscious creation of his own legend through the media, and his bizarre, jazz-inflected mandate that turned a city of victims into a temporary orchestra of the fearful. The Axeman's identity is lost to time. He was a phantom who used an axe not just as a weapon, but as a chisel to carve his name into the folklore of a city. He is a reminder that the most terrifying mysteries are not those with convoluted answers, but those where the questions themselves echo, unanswered, through the decades.